So it's my pleasure to introduce our final speaker of BAAL 2023, Ibrar Bhatt. Welcome again to delegates here in the room and to everybody online. Ibrar is a senior lecturer at the School of Social Sciences, Education and Social Work at Queen's University Belfast, where he was also the director of the Masters in TESOL between 2018 and 2021. His research interests encompass literacy studies, higher education and digitalisation. Between 2021 and 23, Ibrar was a recipient of a Leverhulme Research Fellowship for a study called Literacy and Harmony, a study of Sino-Muslim heritage literacy in China. His most recent book, titled A Semiotics of Muslimness in China, is forthcoming with Cambridge University Press. It draws from extensive field work with the Sino-Muslim community across China and presents a detailed account of the multiplicity and semiotic properties of the community's heritage literacies. Other recent work of Ibrar's includes The Epistemology of Deceit, an edited volume, Academics Writing, The Dynamics of Knowledge Creation, co-authored, Assignments as Controversies, Digital Literacy and Writing in Classroom Practice, sole-authored, as well as many published research articles on similar subjects. He's a member of the Governing Council of the Society for Research into Higher Education and convened its digital university network between 2015 and 2022. He's also executive editor for the journal Teaching in Higher Education, Critical Perspectives, and serves on the editorial board for the journal Postdigital Science and Education. The breadth and brilliance of Ibrar's mind became clear to me several years ago when, during a discussion among early career researchers, I heard him draw on the particle wave duality of matter to make a point about conflicting realities in our field. Talk about opening up applied linguistics. So let's welcome Ibrar to BAAL 2023.
Hi everybody, thank you very much for the introduction. I don't remember that actually, you'll have to tell me when that was. I don't know what I was on that day. But yeah, so thank you. It's good to be back to BAAL, for BAAL, and also back in my native Yorkshire. It's always a pleasure. So, when we think about progress in our own lives and in the world around us, we tend to remember firsts. The first flight we took, the first overnight trip away from home, the first time our children walked on their own. But while these are neat bookmarks in everyday life, the truly important moment is when these things cease to be novelties and instead become integrated into our lives, something that we rely on, couldn't imagine a world without, things that just are an everyday part of our lives. That integration, when something ceases to be a novelty, it's a very tricky thing to define and describe. And it's particularly tricky for what I'm going to try to discuss today, which is our post-digital condition. Those of you in the room who are as wise and mature as me will have witnessed the world become more digitalized. And like me, I'm sure you have mixed emotions about that. Now, digital firsts are quite easy to recall, especially language practices, your first email, learning to type in a foreign language, your first conversation with a fridge. But how about the moment the digital became truly intertwined with our lives? By this point, even the most committed Luddite would concede that that moment has happened. But from there, things get a little bit more complex. Firstly, our digital lives are very personal things. Any answer would have to contend with a multiple range of perspectives. My experience would be different to yours, which would be different to a teenager in a country far away from here. Secondly, it's a challenge because digitalization is still progressing at dizzying speed. It's both happened and happening. The World Wide Web, mobile phones, smartphones, 3G, 4G, 5G, 6G, ChatGPT, the Internet of Things, and of course, fridges that you can have a conversation with. There hasn't been a natural moment, I don't think, where we could realistically draw breath and reflect with confidence on digitalization. And what I want to talk about today is how, in addressing digitalization, applied linguistics may have wrestled with some challenges to find a language of description to make sense of it all, So our field is an agile one. It has adapted well to theorize language and digitalization, but it has been somewhat of a race to adapt, in which researchers had to keep up with technological developments. So perhaps beginning a conversation around post-digital is a next stage in that journey. So I'd like to contribute my small part in that conversation and to start with early thinkers who are considering the concept of the post-digital condition that we are currently in. So a key influence is from an article written by Nicholas Negroponte in Wired magazine back in 1998. And the article was called Beyond Digital. So Negroponte compared what he perceived in the 90s as our digitalized future to a scene from the 1967 film, The Graduate. In the film, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a good film, there's a character called Benjamin Braddock, played by Dustin Hoffman. Benjamin is at a loss about his future. The context is the psychedelic 60s, a period of profound shift in the visions and expectations of previous generations. So in the scene, Benjamin gets some career advice from his teacher, Mr. Maguire, who confidently tells him that the future of business and prosperity is in plastics. Just one word, plastics, he tells him. 30 or so years later, Negroponte suggests that now that we're in the future, plastics are no big deal. Is digital destined for the same banality? Certainly, Negroponte argues, because its literal form, i.e. the technology, is already being taken for granted. Like air and drinking water, being digital will be noticed by its absence and not its presence. So in character with the spirit of the 90s, Negroponte's focus is technology, here plastics and digital technology. And the concept of post-digital emerges from the idea of its presence and absence. These kernels of post-digital thinking are from which the discussion of digitalization in applied linguistics could, in my opinion, begin. So in simple terms, the post-digital perspective is an idea that says that the digital world is so integrated and imbricated into our everyday physical and social activities that it's not worth singling out, much like plastics have become such an integral part of our lives and even found their way into our bodies in the form of microplastics. Digital technology also permeates every aspect of our lives and increasingly our bodies too. Now let's think about the term prefix post for a minute. Post is a prefix we often use. It has different meanings depending on the context. Think of words like post-punk. When we use post, it's usually a sign that we're questioning or casting a critical lens upon whatever term comes after it. For example, postmodernism means that we are examining what modernism is really about. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're moving beyond modernism, historically speaking, as might be suggested by post-structuralism, where post, for some, means anything other than structuralism. Instead, it suggests we should critically consider what terms like modernism, structuralism, or digital mean in the context of the past, present, and future. Posts, therefore, need not be proposals that we are moving past something in a historical sense. In fact, digital and post-digital may have to coexist for the latter to have currency. So for me, post-digital equates to more than digital, or at least that's one way to understand it for my purposes. It's about recognizing that our digital existence is inseparably intertwined with our physical and social lives. Let's think about this. If we are said to be entering the post-digital age, paradoxically, this doesn't mean less technology. Actually, it could be the opposite. Our day-to-day lives are becoming even more filled with digital devices, systems, codes, and software. This digital influence surrounds us even when we are not actively using it or recognizing it. Now you might say, well, what about people who don't have access to digital technology? What if I'm in the middle of the Saharan desert without a mobile signal? If you're on the worst end of what some might refer to as the digital divide, it doesn't mean that you're living a completely analog life, untouched by digitalization. It doesn't mean that you're unimpacted by the encroachment of digitalization. Instead, it suggests you've got less control or agency in dealing with the effects of digitalization. In a world where technology and capitalism are increasingly intertwined, people in such circumstances are inevitably also part of the post-digital condition. So here, post-digital highlights inequalities in a new way and enters into questions of social justice rather than uncritically accepting the digital state of things. So whether you're the type of person who's always chasing the latest gadget or not, we're all aboard the digital train. It passed a while ago, but some people have a better seat than others. The post-digital, according to Tim Fawns and colleagues, is therefore a broad concept that encapsulates a societal condition, an approach to research and critical inquiry, or a theoretical perspective, sensibility, or philosophical position. In 2014, the term entered into academic circles more centrally with a special issue titled Post-Digital Research, edited by Anderson and colleagues, but remained largely in the arts and practice-based domains of academia. So what does the post-digital mean for us in our research? Well, for my own work in literacy research, I'd like to illustrate through this vignette as an example. It's from some data I collected as part of a recent project in which I examined the everyday literacy practices of undergraduate students at a university. Here you can see the morning routine from Jing, not her real name. The data was gleaned from both a diary interview and an app which tracked her digital usage over a period of time. So Jing gets up in the morning and immediately checks her phone and the app which monitors her sleep patterns. She notices some Weixin or WeChat messages have arrived overnight from her friends and family in different countries, and quickly responds to some of these by typing on her cell phone. For others, she uses voice replies because she can't be bothered to type. Then she quickly likes some of her friends' posts which cheer her up. She gets out of bed and then checks the mail as she's expecting a letter from her solicitor, walking past the Chinese calligraphy in the hallway. She reads the letter as she opens her new packet of Turkish coffee, relying on the instructional images. The letter needs to be signed and returned. The account of Jing's morning literacy practices is a typical example of how literacy practices are tied to situations and events in everyday life. In just 15 minutes, she engages in a wide variety of literacy practices that encompass different modes and media and, as I am attempting to argue, are decidedly post-digital. Her use of a sleep app demonstrates that some of her literacy practices connect with her health and well-being concerns. She then responds to messages from friends and family and leaves voice replies. The technology assists with transcription and translation if need be. She engages in a kind of supportive or emotional labor by liking posts. This contrasts with the solicitor's letter, which is an example of how certain forms of literacy remain linked to paper-based modes, as she must sign the letter and return it by post. Her preparation of Turkish coffee requires her to read the instructional images on the packet, and her calligraphy reflects a form of traditional heritage literacy which serves a more emblematic purpose in her life. A few minutes of Jing's rather mundane morning highlights the importance of understanding literacy research as a context-rich field of inquiry that is embedded in everyday life goals and not the preserve of institutions. This has been the commitment within the field of literacy studies, which has always been at the forefront of exploring language in this way. Scholars working within foundational works within literacy studies, such as by the late Brian Street, Jim G., David Barton, Mary Hamilton, and others, have emphasized the significance of ethnographic investigations into literacy as situated at the level of the everyday and being embedded in social, spatial, material, and historical contexts. More recent incorporations of a theory of networks and assemblages have also helped us to consider the wider factors at play in literacy events, such as Jing's morning routines. The concept of literacy event was initially conceived as a face-to-face encounter with text, bedtime stories in the work of Shirley Bryce Heath. Later assemblage ideas developed this and have allowed us to bring together different actors and materialities from different time spaces in understanding literacy activity, particularly its here and now-ness. Just think of Jing's multiple events folded across different times and spaces, tools and value systems. We can learn about this from the work of Deborah Brandt, and through later developments by Kathy Kell, Leslie Gurley, Kathy Burnett and Guy Merchant, Kate Parle and Jennifer Rousel, and others. Through their work, I wish to highlight that understanding the post-digital condition means acknowledging the importance of what some might term the analog or non-digital, As in literacy activity, not all of these materialities in literacy assemblages are digital as much as they are also unbounded and iterative, as we see with Jing. Jing's morning literacy practices take place in what I would call a post-digital literacy ecology. People's attachments to analog and even fondness for it are central to our conceptions and practices of literacy. Consider memes and GIFs as the quintessential post-digital utterance that exemplify the interwovenness between human and technological, pre-digital and post-digital. This connection can be described as a post-digital literacy ecology. Drawing from David Barton's use of the metaphor of ecology, within this kind of framework, we can see an intertwining of the past, the present, the future, the analog and the digital. Retro technologies have their place and their usefulness. Florian Kramer explores this with the famous meme, "You are not a real hipster till you take your typewriter to the park." I found two similar memes on the website Quick Meme. It's a humorous meme that satirizes a feature of hipster culture, essentially its preference for retro items like typewriters. Here the meme highlights a playful reflection on an ideology that reevaluates the usefulness of digitalization juxtaposed with modern life, a desire to reconnect or reclaim analog experience. Such ideas are further and somewhat more seriously talked about in David Sacks's book, The Future is Analog. Sacks's contention is that there is something fundamental to the human condition about the analog, something that no matter how advanced, digital alternatives cannot replace. He draws examples from the pandemic of the emptiness of video conferencing, sorry people online, versus in-person meetings, and even suggests that the pain of commuting is ultimately important for people to experience, as it forces us to engage with the world in a way that comfortable digital workspaces do not. Now, you may or may not agree with Sacks's book and his provocative contentions, but it certainly forces you to think post-digitally. So the post-digital is not about throwing up your hands and saying, there's nothing we can do, the machinification of everything is complete. And neither is it about using typewriters in Starbucks. Rather, it is about delving deeper into the complexities of ecologies of literacy or linguistic practice, which are not always digital, and uncovering new linguistic insights and knowledge through our research. The concept of post-digital is thus, in the words of Petar Jandrić and colleagues, a rupture in our existing theories and their continuation. This leads us to a nexus of interrelated challenges and tensions which are rarely tackled in education, sociology, informatics, and applied linguistics together. Yet they weigh upon our historical moment. Some of these challenges include, and we've discussed them already, generative AI, biomedical advances, algorithmic capitalism, algorithmic populism, surveillance, post-truth, and other issues, many of which feature in the journal Postdigital Science and Education, a relatively young academic journal, but watch out for it because it is rapidly developing into an inter- and transdisciplinary playground for such conversations. So when we talk about post-digital possibilities in applied linguistics, then what does a rupture in existing theories look like? Well, there have been other ruptures in applied linguistics, critiques of rigid monolingualism, for example. There are two main areas of thought that I think, or for me at least, have been gateways into post-digital thinking. Actor-network theory, particularly its socio-material stance, mentioned briefly already, and multimodality. One aspect of post-digital convergence is the more than human, and relatedly, that no phenomenon should be confined to one context, one discipline, or one way of thinking, echoing a kind of hybridity. You may have heard a similar argument before. I certainly remember hearing one. And I recall it coming from Bruno Latour regarding modernism and the actor-network theory project. While making the argument for his actor-network method, he writes that the smallest AIDS virus takes you from sex to the unconscious, then to Africa, tissue cultures, DNA, San Francisco, but the analysts, thinkers, journalists, and decision makers will slice the delicate network up into compartments. The quote is important, I think, because it highlights how phenomena are held together by various codependencies, which in modern contexts are usually delineated. Just think of how different columns of a newspaper might report on the same thing. In this way, post-digital inquiry can be about researchers seeing technologies and language practices as entangled parts of more complex wholes, and following those complex parts might take you anywhere analytically, methodologically, epistemically. Latour would later crystallize these ideas into the actor network theory project, a key part of which is the importance of non-human actors, already mentioned. Therefore, the notion of the post-digital is not well served by paradigmatic and methodological enclosure. It is considered as a guiding idea to undertake empirical work that is creative, speculative, and multi-perspectival in order to speculate how linguistic problems are brought together. Think of it as a wide lens on a problem. For applied linguists, perhaps another gateway into post-digital perspectives is the study of multimodality. Multimodality approaches representation, communication, and interaction through more than language in use, as encapsulated by much work, including by Kerry Jewett and others. Multimodality is thus a more than theory. Thinking of a post-digital literacy ecology, we can trace how semiotic dimensions of representation, modes, can straddle digital and non-digital spaces, and what that does to interaction. For example, if I were to ever meet Al Pacino in the flesh, I'd probably recall the cover to the film Scarface in my mind in order to recognize him. A cornerstone of Peircean semiotics is that a sign is only a sign in actu by virtue of its receiving an interpretation, indicating that a sign's true nature or purpose is only realized when it is actively being interpreted. This can reside within the interpreter's imagination, of course. The Scarface film cover, which I cannot help but associate with Al Pacino, is a modality that is digitally amplified through infinite images that I've seen of it online, on Netflix, etc. These modalities are pragmatically recalled in my mind, in my imagination, to shape how I would respond to their signification in real life. How I interact with these modalities, that is to say their direction of signification, is very post-digital, as is my hypothetical saying hello to my little friend Al Pacino. Other broadenings of the conceptual and analytic frame of applied linguistics have occurred through the work of translanguaging. See the work of Li Wei and others. Posthumanism in applied linguistics, see the work of Alistair Pennycook and others, and also posthumanism in literacy studies and education, see the work of Leslie Gurley. These can all be described as more than theories, in that they have opened up applied linguistics to a wider framing of what counts, beyond glottocentric, anthropocentric, and monolingual imaginaries of linguistic practice. These more than theories, in my view, bring us to the concept of the post-digital. They are gateways to it. So I'd now like to look at a few examples of how people working in the study of language, applied linguistics, sociolinguistics, and literacy studies have used or ended up deploying the motif of the post-digital and what we can learn from that. The late Jan Blommaert argued that post-digital environments are new sociolinguistic environments, and discourse analysis must pay attention to the new sociolinguistic conditions affecting our contemporary forms of communication. Specifically looking at propaganda models, Blommaert argued that people are now targeted with political messages as members of very particular niche groups. This has led to a decidedly algorithmic populism in which there is not a singular or exclusive mass media instrument by which a linear flow of propaganda messages or political messages will flow. Now we have multiple alternative media to contend with, and forms of online discourse are a kind of digital niche or micro-marketing, resulting in the words of Blommaert, loose, temporal, and unstable coalitions between micro-audiences. A case in point is the Brexit referendum in the United Kingdom, which was a coming together of people from across the political spectrum. Perhaps a better example was the campaign to deter Afro-American voters from voting for the Democratic Party in the 2016 US election. The highly sophisticated campaign divided 200 million voters into 8 different subcategories for niche targeting of political messages. One subgroup, labeled as deterrence, consisted overwhelmingly of black and other groups of color, and were fed anti-Clinton adverts which focused on out-of-context quotes to discredit her record on race relations, as reported by Channel 4 News. Blommaert's point here is that these are new sociolinguistic environments, and they necessitate new post-digital ways of theorizing how political discourse occurs. Mass media still, of course, has a place in political messaging, but today's public must contend with a double, nay triple whammy of political messages from both mass media and multitudes of alternative, often hyper-partisan media. Political communication in post-digital environments involves a multitude of actors, both human and non-human, both types producing and receiving messages. Political communication today is decidedly post-digital. I tried to address some of these issues with colleagues Alison Mackenzie and Jennifer Rose in our edited volume as part of the Post-Digital Science and Education book series. In line with our attempt to deploy post-digital sensibilities, we brought together various perspectives, including the studies of epistemology, which was our overall framing, political science, discourse and applied linguistics, social informatics, law, media studies, and other fields. Our attempt at a post-digital approach was to bring people from these various fields literally together in conversation about the issues as one collective whole. Post-digital transdisciplinarity depends on our deployment of theories which are, in Ruqayya Hassan's terms, exotropic. That is to say, they are theories that can be open to dialogue with other theories. For us, this book is one of a number of attempts to begin a conversation around digital epistemologies, which can be shared across disciplines. That conversation is still ongoing. The QR code takes you to my website where I introduce the book in a video. Another example is from my recent work on Sinophone Muslim or Sino-Muslim, Chinese Muslim, heritage literacy in China, where I have encountered data which I think can be understood as post-digital. Since Sino-Muslim heritage literacy, that is to say the Hui minority in China, if you don't know, since Sino-Muslim heritage literacy often manifests in artwork, many of my research participants are artists who specialize in the art of Sinai, or if you say it in Arabic, Sini calligraphy, or the culturally infused practice of Chinese Islamic art, a practice which for my respondents shifted online due to the pandemic. The screenshot, which is taken from my forthcoming book, A Semiotics of Muslimness in China, is from the social media account of a calligraphy respondent, whom I shall refer to as Teacher Li. He has been conducting classes online using his WeChat account, to promote his calligraphy practice. His social media updates are all calligraphy related, often with images of his work and sometimes spiritual advice based on the calligraphy presented, though for this he needs to tread quite carefully due to online censorship laws. An example of this is the post, which is his calligraphic rendition of a brief poem by the 8th century theologian Ash-Shafi'i. His artwork is Ash-Shafi'i's poem, Arabic poem, which is worded in a particular way, which Teacher Li then renders into something slightly different in the Chinese version. The original Arabic, which remember is a work of art, calligraphic art, contains the words, "and you have Islam and general wellness," in Arabic, afia. Instead of directly translating the original Arabic in the piece, he presents a version that has explicit reference to religion removed. He uses the word jiaomen, which roughly translates to teachings. To write another version altogether, jiaomen can relate to Taoism and Buddhism if you look it up on Baidu. It's a word that is deployed strategically here in the post, a word that is designed to be noticed by some but not detected by an AI censoring system, which is based by and large on keyword detection, usually religious or political keywords, and words that are related to events deemed inimical to social harmony. Platform censorship is both AI and human configured. I recall a recent tragic story of one human censor, an employee of a Chinese platform, I think it was Weibo, who died due to overwork. Any mention of his identity and circumstances of his death were themselves censored on the very platform. Censoring the censor is indeed a very post-digital problem. So this kind of semiotic practice of tiptoeing along the red lines and negotiating with sensitive word detection emerged repeatedly in my data. In everyday language, calligraphers engaged in a kind of ongoing negotiation between their ancient heritage and modern systems of censorship, both AI and human. This is from another calligrapher's post. Here, Teacher Han, not his real name, shares his newest artwork in this post, showcasing a significant phrase chanted during meditative remembrance. The artwork incorporates a backdrop inspired by a traditional Chinese landscape style, shanshui, renowned for its ability to evoke emotions and spiritual concepts. Alongside the artwork, Teacher Han writes a post which has been translated from the Mandarin. The Chinese text of Han's post is actually a paraphrasing of a well-known religious tradition or saying, though here the saying is depicted but not referenced as one, for to do so might result in the post being removed. In an online platform in which religious content, especially that which is considered to be proselytizing, is banned, but intangible cultural heritage is not. And this is the interesting part. Instead, he dresses up the message as a general piece of advice. Like Teacher Lee in the previous example, in discussions with me, and I spent an extended period with both of them, they talked about this kind of role as central to their calligraphy role, in line with how they themselves were taught. My master would not just test my writing, he would test my temperament, Lee relates. Building on work by Michael Silverstein, Jan Blommaert, and others, I regard these kinds of elisions and deletions as forms of situated retextualization, understood as the dynamic movement of certain elements of language and discourse into other settings, in particular moments such as online posts. My attempt to understand the calligrapher's posts about their work requires an acknowledgement that their online linguistic practices, I would argue, are as important as their brushstrokes in the creation of their work and its interpretation as a post-digital form of heritage maintenance from already intextualized original calligraphy piece. And remember, it's already intextualized because it's scriptural art written in a Chinese style, to a redacted and distilled Chinese version beside it, with often a further redacted and distilled text of a post beside that. The elisions by the two calligraphers create hidden references to religion in order to avoid being censored as they tiptoe along the red lines of online discourse. In only working with the first intextualization, the handcrafted work of art, the job is not done, because for these teachers, scriptural art requires an explanation, an exegesis of some sort. In bygone times, this would have been done in a lecture, as masters taught people how to write sacred art. They also relayed its deeper meanings. In post-digital times, this occurs through such intextualized online posts, except now they have a global and diverse audience and a complex AI censoring system to contend with. The work of Deborah Brandt and Kathy Kell and others who've drawn from Littorian actor network theory point to the fact that it's not just present elements which are enlisted to make up the literacy activity, but also non-present actors which lean into and take a role in shaping it. For these religious calligraphers, post-digital retextualization is a way to attain a degree of agency in creating their work, explaining its significance, strategically reglossing it to avoid censorship, and all the while maintaining the attention of their audience as carriers and purveyors of Sino-Muslim heritage within a space that must remain secularized. So far, the censoring system of the Weixin platform has not blocked them for religious content. This is likely because Sinai calligraphy is considered a form of national cultural heritage. We could say that imagistically it is allowed, but for textual explanations, calligraphers play things much more carefully. Such forms of self-censoring online are very much a post-digital phenomenon. Such heritage literacy practices, I would argue, take place within a post-digital literacy ecology spanning Chinese art, Sinai Arabic art, Arabic poetry, religious theology, and the platform's automated censoring system. It exemplifies the complex platformization of literacy, art, and religion. Teachers Lee and Han have not just mastered the art of calligraphy, they've mastered the art of tiptoeing the red lines. This is an extract of an online recording of a calligraphy class, which I observed. You can see that he undertakes his writing art and teaches the brush up, here it's a pen, stroke via webcam. Not only is the tiptoeing of linguistic red lines a post-digital phenomenon here, but also the calligraphy practice, which is by its nature a very tactile and hands-on art form. It is created within the digital environment. Here, Sinai calligraphy is a post-digital mashup that integrates performance-based practice with exegetal reading, with a wide online audience. So there are many ways one can examine this kind of heritage literacy in the post-digital age. The nature of religious practice in post-digital context is fascinating. We saw all sorts of religious services from all groups move online during the pandemic. So much so that this was the subject of a recent edited volume on post-digital theologies, which may interest some of you. Though I was not involved in this, I did interview the authors, and that interview is online. More studies on language practices of religion and heritage in the post-digital context would be welcomed. Continuing with the literacies example, and also in the context of platforms, Bradley Robinson's research examines how platforms interface with algorithms to produce particular formations of literacy, and what those formations mean for ethical and equitable literacies in society. Platforms, in this sense, are understood as complex infrastructures that enable varying forms of linguistic production and social interaction and economic activity. Platform practices are often specific kinds of literacy practices. A platform perspective to literacy and linguistic study is one that forces us to examine literacy at the subscrenic level. In other words, how digital infrastructures and logics shape practices of literacy. A linguistic focus on platforms can illuminate how linguistic activity is being reconfigured through a study of what happens on, with, behind, and beyond a platform. Robinson found that platform literacy practices were structured around the platform's economic raison d'etre, and that understanding platform logics is essential in understanding users' literacy practices. The success of platform capitalism is largely attributed to its deliberate use of secrecy and obfuscation. We simply do not know enough about how they operate, and how platforms can even serve as kinds of sponsors of literacy in Deborah Brandt's sense of the word, in that they promote, enable, encourage, and limit users to certain forms of literacy. Post-digital sensibilities here are clearly taking us far beyond any notion of digital literacy as a procedural competency. In terms of methodology, we need to disentangle the relational nature and the interwovenness of platform literacy practices. In other words, bring platform research to bear upon literacy studies and applied linguistics more broadly, for a post-digital world is a platformized world. Post-digital sensibilities are also considered in recent linguistic ethnographic work by Caroline Tagg and Agnieszka Lyons, who undertook research into mobile messages. Zoe Hurley presents the idea of post-digital visual pentimenti to capture the semiotics of Dubai's social media influencers. Her research uses a layering of methods, including interviews with influencers, marketers, audience focus groups, together with analyses of various online corpora. In all of these studies and more, the post-digital is invoked as a way to understand how boundaries are transcended, the multi-layered nature of meaning-making, and how tensions are brought to the fore through various agentive materialities. What these studies collectively unveil is the idea that literacy and meaning-making more broadly is not merely a visible feature of digitalization, but inseparable from the deep-seated social, political, cultural, and economic values permeating technologies. Our understanding of language, semiotics, literacy, and meaning-making in our post-digital age should extend to recognizing issues of how platforms, social media, AI, and more have altered our societies, economies, heritage practices, and political environments and political discourse, which in turn impact how language is used. While the concept of post-digital is therefore agnostic in terms of discipline, linguistic analysis of some sort is at the various substrata of all of those issues. So, to end, I began by telling you that the post-digital is a tricky thing for applied linguistics to define and describe, presenting perhaps unprecedented challenges surrounding the phenomenology of language, literacy, and communication. But equally, I hope in discussing it, I have shown how important it is to take the challenge on, to address urgent and global problems in our applied linguistic endeavors. Perhaps it falls on individual researchers in applied linguistics to take a position on what post-digital means within the context of their own work. Perhaps some of you already are. Perhaps some of you just didn't label it as post-digital. Perhaps you don't need to. To avoid hyper-specialization, and to question the incontrovertibility of the digital, to adopt approaches that de-center the digital, and also serve as mechanisms for undoing the digital, to borrow a word from Cathy Bennett and Guy Merchant. This includes questioning what counts as an evidence base, and how we might generate new kinds of knowledge in our current post-digital ways of living. Post-digital research is therefore not just interdisciplinary, but also transdisciplinary. We must seek out new coalitions and try speculative approaches in which we work with people from different perspectives, brought together through a kind of post-digital convergence. And this attitude is important as we are rapidly approaching a new set of linguistic problems and questions, which will demand that we broaden our thinking even further. Questions such as what kind of language ideologies are promoted and encouraged by language models such as ChatGPT, since they model set language patterns and then spit them out. What are the implications when, through the model's use, its own formations of literacy will ultimately find their way back into the chat box corpus? What are the linguistic features of epistemic vices such as prejudice, misogyny, and bigotry online? And what are the discourses of fake news? How are linguistic practices of religion and heritage impacted by AI and digital censorship? And how are meanings recontextualized and resemiotized? With AI, will we even need to learn languages anymore? Because conceptions of the post-digital in applied linguistics are still ripe for negotiation, Leslie Gurley and I have decided to co-edit a special issue of Post-Digital Science and Education, which might help us to have this kind of conversation. Feel free to scan the QR code and submit an abstract. So perhaps next time we speak, I will have some answers for you. But for now, I hope I've left you with some interesting questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibrar. An extremely stimulating talk. We'll open up the floor to questions. We've got plenty of time for questions, and also online, ironically. Post them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that as well. But yeah, our helpers are around with the microphones.
This is totally speculative, but is one answer to the conundrum that you described to not only to develop more critical literacy for our online engagement, but to also disengage from it?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? There's a bit of an echo.
Yes, I wonder if one answer to the many problems you described would be for us to not only to develop more critical digital literacy, critical engagement, but also just to use it less, to disengage.
To use digital technologies less?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the post-digital, like the hipster in the typewriter in the park. I mean, it's a humorous take, but yes, the analog is still very, very important in our existence, and acknowledging that is very important. Definitely the critical aspect is really important, because technology companies, the people who design these technologies, often design them with a particular ideology or sort of world vision in mind. And it's important to be aware of that, and that vision often is factored into the things that they create. So when people say that a technology will replace a teacher, often there are people who are very much invested in that idea, designing the technology. So it's not always your best friend, but critical engagement is very much necessary. I think a post-digital perspective opens it up a little bit to a more than digital. And I think that allows you to be critical without being locked into the digital aspect, and being stuck in this sort of phase of where you are continuously being facing a new technology and dealing with its novelty. But moving out from that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Passing it down.
Ross Mitchell from Southampton. Thank you very much for a fascinating talk. I was really interested in your comment about how ChatGPT and similar tools might affect the nature of language itself through recycling. And I wondered, I mean, we're all interested in and conscious of hybrid language practices and multilingual language practices. How is there any research or any indication of how these technologies deal with those types of language practices, and whether they can accommodate them, or whether the effect will be to actually eliminate them in
Yeah,
favour of...
I think there's someone called Emily Bender, and she writes a lot about this. She's a linguist, and she's a brilliant mind. And she talks about ChatGPT. Obviously, it's very new, and so a lot of commentary around it is just commentary. But the corpora that the ChatGPT will draw from, that I don't know if that's raw language, as in what people use on an everyday basis. And so there are language ideologies clearly embedded within that. And if people then use those, and then later on that becomes part of the corpus as well, you've got this circular, self-serving ideology that will just become a very stable and solidified norm. Very dangerous in some ways linguistically for diversity and hybrid translingual practices. Yeah, this is a really, it has a potential to be quite serious. So yeah, it's something we should think about and do some work on.
Yeah, I've got one. It's a bit of a basic question, so I'm sorry in advance. So you described post-digital theory. It's like a more than theory. In some sense, it goes beyond a theory, but it seems to me it is itself a theory. So it's something that's at the same time more than a theory, but is a theory. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is do you, in terms of understanding it, is it something that is simply defined in terms of looking back post-digital? It's understood in relation to that thing in the past, or does it have a more sort of positive, affirmative definition or a way of understanding it? So that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are many ways to look at post-digital, and if you go to even the journal Postdigital Science and Education, you'll just find many different ways of looking at it. I like to use it as shorthand for more than digital. I think that helps, and we decided to go with more than digital meaning making and this call for papers to open it up outside, but to include digital, but also to sort of not be confined to that. I never liked the term digital literacy, even though I used it in my PhD and my book and everything. I kind of never liked it at the time. But yeah, so not post as in we're past something in a historical sense, but post as in like more than that thing, or a critical lens upon that thing,
And just tagged onto that sort of crystal ball question. So I suppose as the years go by, that this can't stand forever. Where do you see it moving? Is it neo-digital or something like that?
I don't know. I really don't know.
I'm going to copyright that.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Look, I mean, you can see it as I see post-digital as a sensibility, okay, as a wide-angle lens, okay. Like heritage, okay, for me to examine the heritage literacy practices of the community, there were some that were digital related, but then I had to step back, take a wide look at the history, at the current practice with digitalization, and how the language choices, regarding how heritage is talked about, especially religion, how that impacts the users on the online course and how they start using language differently about heritage. Okay, so I see it as post-digital then. So heritage becomes this, like, heritage literacy has become this part of an ecology, post-digital ecology of practice.
Yeah. Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, I think, shall we close? Yeah, thank you to Ibrar again, once again. Thank you very much.